Welcome to my YouTube channel at Sci-Fi Tales Pools. Please subscribe, like, and share to support my channel. The palace hall was filled with warm light from the tall windows. Soft music from the royal musicians floated in the air as people moved about, speaking in gentle voices. Princess Lila sat near the large marble fountain, her long dress pooling around her feet. She was waiting for her father, the king, to return from an important meeting. Her thoughts wandered to the upcoming summit, where leaders from many kingdoms would gather. She knew she would have to smile, greet strangers, and make polite conversation. It was the life she had always known. When the heavy doors of the hall opened, Lila looked up and saw her father walk in. His steps were firm, his face serious. Beside him walked a tall man dressed in the dark blue uniform of the royal guard. He had short brown hair, sharp eyes, and carried himself with quiet strength. His boots made a steady sound on the polished floor. The king came to stand before Lila. His voice was calm, but left no room for argument. He told her that from this day forward, Captain Jack Monroe would be her personal protector. He would guard her at all times, especially during the summit. Lila's eyes widened. She had heard stories about this man. Some said he was fearless in battle, but others whispered that he was too harsh, too quick to fight. She had imagined him as a cold and dangerous figure, and now here he was, standing only a few feet away. Lila's hands tightened in her lap. She looked at her father, her voice quiet but firm. She told him she did not want this man to guard her. She said she was afraid of him. The king's expression softened for a moment, but he shook his head. He said Jack had proven himself many times, and that there was no one more capable to protect her. The decision was final. Jack stood still, his face unreadable. He did not speak, but his eyes met hers for a brief moment. They were steady, not cruel. Lila turned her head away quickly, feeling a strange mix of unease and curiosity. That evening, the palace was quiet. Lila walked through the gardens, hoping to clear her mind. The air smelled of roses and fresh rain. She could hear footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Jack following at a respectful distance. He did not approach, but his presence was like a shadow she could not escape. She wondered if he thought about her the same way she thought about him. Did he know she feared him? Did he care? The next day brought the first signs of tension. Palace staff moved in and out of her chambers, preparing dresses and travel plans for the summit. Wherever she went, Jack was there. He walked behind her in the corridors, stood near the doors when she spoke with her friends, and watched silently when she practiced her speech for the opening ceremony. Once in the library, she dropped a book from the high shelf. Jack was there in an instant, catching it before it hit the ground. She murmured a quiet thank you, but he simply nodded and stepped back. It was a small thing, yet she felt her heartbeat quicken for reasons she could not explain. That night, Lila sat by her window, looking out at the distant lights of the city. She told herself she did not like this man, that he was nothing more than a soldier assigned to her. But deep down, she felt the first flicker of doubt. He had not been unkind, had not spoken a harsh word to her. Still, the stories she had heard weighed heavily on her mind. In another part of the palace, Jack sat alone at a long wooden table, cleaning the worn leather of his gloves. His mind was focused, his thoughts silent. He knew the princess did not trust him. He also knew that his duty was not to be liked, but to keep her safe. The summit would bring dangers neither of them could yet see, and he intended to be ready for all of them. The first day of their strange partnership was ending, but neither of them knew how much their lives were about to change. The morning sun shone through the tall palace windows, filling the hallways with soft light. Servants moved quietly, carrying trays of breakfast and stacks of papers for the king. Princess Lila walked slowly toward the dining room, her mind still troubled. She could feel Jack's presence behind her, silent and steady, his boots making a faint sound on the polished floor. She told herself she would simply ignore him. She kept her distance the days until the summit would pass without trouble. But that thought did not last long. Later that morning, she attended a meeting with visiting ministers in one of the smaller reception rooms. The air inside was warm and filled with the smell of fresh flowers placed on the table. Lila sat beside her father, smiling politely, while the ministers spoke about trade routes and agreements. Jack stood near the wall, watching the room without speaking. His eyes moved slowly from one face to another, never resting for too long. Halfway through the meeting, a strange sound echoed faintly through the corridor outside. It was like the metallic click of a latch being forced open. Jack's gaze shifted immediately toward the door. Lila noticed the sudden change in his expression, calm, but sharply alert. Without a word, Jack stepped toward the entrance. At that moment, the doors burst open, and a man dressed in dark clothes rushed inside. He carried a small weapon in his hand, and his face was twisted with anger. The ministers gasped and backed away from the table. The king rose to his feet in shock. Before Leela could even move, Jack was between her and the intruder. His body was a shield, his voice firm as he told the man to drop the weapon. The man shouted something about revenge, his hand trembling. Jack did not flinch. In one quick motion, he stepped forward, grabbed the man's wrist, and forced the weapon to the floor. The intruder struggled, but Jack moved with calm strength, holding him until 2 guards rushed in to take him away. The room was silent for a moment after the man was gone. Lila's heart was pounding. She had never seen someone move so quickly, so sure of every action. Jack turned to look at her. His expression was still unreadable, but his eyes held a question: "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still unable to find her voice. Her father thanked Jack, his tone warm and sincere. The ministers murmured in agreement, praising his skill. Leela looked down at her hands, not wanting anyone to see the confusion on her face. She had been afraid of him, certain he was dangerous. Yet in that moment, his danger had saved her. Later in the day, she found herself in the palace gardens again. The air was cool, and the sound of water trickling from the fountains made her feel calm. She walked slowly along the stone path, thinking about what had happened. Jack was nearby as always, but this time she found herself glancing at him more than once. She remembered the way he had stepped in front of her, without hesitation. He had not hesitated even when the weapon was pointed in their direction. He had not shouted or acted wildly, only done what was needed to protect her. At last, she spoke to him. Her voice was quiet, almost uncertain. She told him she was surprised by what he had done earlier. Jack looked at her for a moment before answering that it was his duty, and he would do it again without question. There was no pride in his words, only honesty. For the rest of the walk, they did not speak again, but the silence between them felt different. It was no longer heavy with mistrust. Lila still did not know if she could call him a friend, but the wall she had built in her mind was not as strong as before. That night, as she sat in her room, she found herself wondering about Jack's life before he came to the palace. Who had taught him to fight like that? What had he seen in all his years as a soldier? She did not know the answers yet, but for the first time, she wanted to. The morning of their journey to the summit came with a pale silver light over the palace. Servants moved quickly, loading trunks and carefully placing documents into secure cases. Princess Leela stood at the top of the palace steps, watching the royal transport ship being prepared. She wore a simple travel gown, her hair tied neatly back, but her thoughts were unsettled. Jack was already near the ship, speaking with the crew and checking the guards posted around the landing area. He moved with quiet authority, giving short instructions and making sure every detail was correct. Lila noticed how the soldiers listened to him without hesitation. When it was time to leave, her father wished her a safe journey and reminded her to represent their kingdom with dignity. Jack stood beside her as they boarded, his presence constant. The ship's engines began to hum, and soon the palace grounds faded from view as they lifted into the bright sky. Inside the ship, Lila sat by the window, looking out at the clouds drifting below. Jack took a seat across from her, a small table between them. For the first hour, neither spoke. Lila kept her eyes on the scenery, but she could feel his gaze shifting to check the room and the people around them. He was always alert, as if danger could come at any moment. After some time, she broke the silence. She asked him if he ever grew tired of being so watchful. Jack shook his head and said that staying alert was not something he could turn off. He explained that in his work, the moment you let your guard down could be the moment you fail to protect someone. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of something deeper, as if he was speaking from hard experience. Leela listened quietly. She wanted to ask him more, but the words felt difficult to shape. She was not used to speaking so personally with a soldier. When the ship stopped to refuel at a secure station, Jack insisted on walking with her through the small market area.
Oh,
She had planned to browse a few stalls alone, but he stayed close, scanning the crowd. At first she felt it was unnecessary, but then she noticed how the people in the market looked at her. Some were curious, others watchful. For the first time, she understood why Jack stayed so near. As they passed a stand selling fresh fruit, a young boy ran up and nearly collided with Lila. She stumbled slightly, but Jack's hand caught her arm before she could fall. His grip was strong, but gentle, and when she looked at him, she saw a flash of concern in his eyes. He released her at once, and she thanked him softly. Back on the ship, the atmosphere between them had shifted. She no longer saw him as just a shadow following her. He had protected her twice now, once from clear danger and once from a small accident. Both times he had acted without hesitation. The journey stretched into the evening, and the sky outside turned dark. The stars shone like silver dust, and the ship glided smoothly through the quiet air. Lila sat with a book in her hands, but she found herself watching Jack from time to time. He was seated near the door, one hand resting on the table, his eyes half focused on the corridor beyond. He looked calm, but she knew he was listening to every sound. Finally, she asked him about his life before the palace. At first he hesitated, but then he spoke about growing up in a small town, joining the defense forces at a young age, and spending years traveling between distant posts. He told her about long nights on patrol, about training until his body ached, and about the people he had met along the way. His words were simple, but there was a quiet weight in them, a sense of the life he had lived. Lila listened until the ship's lights dimmed for the night. She realized she had learned more about him in one day than she had expected to learn in a year. She did not feel the same fear she had when they first met. Instead, she felt something new and understanding that this man's life was built on keeping others safe, no matter the cost to himself. When the ship finally neared the city, where the summit would be held, Lila looked out at the lights below. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that whatever awaited them there, she would face it differently now. Jack was still a soldier, but he was no longer a stranger. The summit hall was grand and filled with warm light from high chandeliers. Flags from many kingdoms hung along the walls, and the air carried the sound of many voices speaking at once. Leaders, ministers, and advisors moved between tables, exchanging greetings and handshakes. Princess Lila walked beside her father, keeping her steps calm and steady. Jack followed closely, his eyes scanning every corner of the hall. They had arrived the night before and had spent the morning in meetings. Now came the official reception, where Lila would greet the other guests. She smiled politely at each person, bowing her head when needed, but her thoughts were never far from the man standing just behind her. She could feel Jack's presence, steady and watchful. As the evening continued, Lila moved to the side of the hall to take a short break. A server offered her a glass of water, which she accepted with a soft thank you. Jack stood only a few steps away, speaking quietly into a small device on his collar, checking with the other guards stationed around the building. Suddenly, the sound of a loud crash came from the far entrance. The music stopped, and voices fell silent. The heavy doors swung open, and a group of armed men rushed in. They were dressed in dark clothing and moved with dangerous speed. Guests began to shout, and panic spread through the room. Before Lila could react, Jack was at her side, his voice low and firm, telling her to stay close. He guided her toward a side exit, keeping himself between her and the danger. One of the attackers spotted them and raised his weapon. In a single motion, Jack pushed Lila behind a marble column and drew his own sidearm. The sharp sound of energy fire echoed through the hall. The guards in the room quickly returned fire, but the attackers were strong and well organized. Jack moved with precise control, never wasting a step. He returned fire when needed, pulled Lila into safer positions, and gave short orders to nearby guards to secure escape routes. At one point, an attacker broke through the line of defense and charged toward Lila. Jack met him head-on, blocking the strike and forcing the man back with a swift move that sent the weapon sliding across the floor. Lila's heart pounded, but she did not freeze this time. She kept moving as Jack had told her, staying behind cover. The fight lasted only minutes, though it felt much longer. One by one, the attackers were captured or driven out by the guards. The hall slowly filled again with the sound of voices, this time mixed with the cries of injured guests and the orders of medics arriving to help. Jack lowered his weapon and turned to Lila. His eyes moved quickly over her, checking for any sign of injury. She shook her head, saying she was fine, though her hands trembled slightly. He gave a small nod, but his attention soon returned to the room, making sure no threat remained. When her father reached them, he thanked Jack with deep relief. The other leaders also spoke of his bravery, but Jack simply said he had done his duty. He did not smile or seek praise. He stayed close to Lila for the rest of the night, his eyes still watchful even after the danger had passed. Later, when they were back in the safety of the guest quarters, Lila sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the way Jack had moved without hesitation, placing himself between her and every danger. Remembered the strength in his voice when he told her to stay close. The certainty that he would not let anything happen to her. For the first time, she felt no fear of him at all. No, what she felt now was harder to name. It was something like trust, but also something warmer, something she had not expected when they first met. She realized that if he had not been there tonight, she might not have been alive to see the morning. In the quiet of the room, she whispered a soft thank you, though Jack was not there to hear it. The summit ended 2 days later. The halls that had once been filled with bright voices were now quieter. The guests had begun to leave, their ships lifting into the pale morning sky. Princess Lila stood at the balcony of her quarters, watching the soft trail of one vessel disappear into the clouds. The city below glowed with the first light of day. Jack stood a short distance away, leaning against the wall near the balcony doors. He had been there since sunrise, silent as always, watching the courtyard below. The air between them felt different now. It no longer carried the cold edge of mistrust. It was calmer, warmer, but neither had spoken about it. The memory of the attack was still fresh in Lila's mind. She could still hear the sharp sounds of the fight, the crash of falling tables, the shouts of the frightened guests. She could still see the way Jack had stood in front of her without fear. In those moments, she had understood something she'd refused to believe. Before, he was not only her guard. He was the reason she had survived. Her father entered the room, his heavy cloak brushing the floor. He spoke to Jack first, thanking him once more for his service and loyalty. Jack nodded in his quiet way, giving no long reply. The king then turned to Lila, telling her they would return to the palace within the hour. After a few final words, he left them alone. The silence that followed was soft but full. Lila turned to look at Jack. He met her gaze, waiting. She stepped closer, her hands folded in front of her. She told him she had been wrong about him. She told him she had feared him because of stories and because she did not understand him. But now she knew those stories had left out the truth. Jack said nothing at first, only listening. Then he told her that it did not matter if she liked him or not, his duty was to keep her safe. But as he said it, his voice held a gentleness she had not heard before. She shook her head and said it did matter. She said she trusted him now, not only because he had protected her, but because she had seen who he truly was. She told him she was no longer afraid. Her cheeks grew warm as she spoke, and for a moment, she looked down at the floor before meeting his eyes again. Jack's expression softened. He gave a small nod, almost like a bow, as if accepting her words. He told her he was glad she felt safe, and that if she ever needed him, he would come, no matter where he was or what he was doing. The engines of the royal transport could be heard outside, signaling that it was time to leave. But Lila did not want this moment to pass unspoken. She stepped closer still, close enough that she could see the fine lines of wear on his uniform, the mark of long years of service. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but clear. She told him that when her father first said his name, she had cried out that she was afraid of him. Now, she said, she could not imagine anyone else standing at her side. She paused, her heart beating quickly, and then said the words she had not planned to say until they rose on their own. Yes, dear. Jack looked at her, and though his face did not change much, there was a light in his eyes she had not seen before. It was not the sharp light of watchfulness, but something warmer, something human. They walked to the transport together. The guards saluted as they passed, and the city's early lights spilled across the landing platform. Lila felt the faintest smile touch her lips. She knew there would be more dangers in the days to come, more duties, and more long hours. But she also knew she would face them differently now. As the transport lifted into the sky, she sat by the window with Jack seated across from her, just as he had on the journey here. Outside, the clouds drifted slowly past, and the sun climbed higher, Inside, the space between them was no longer filled with silence that kept them apart, but with a quiet that held something unspoken yet certain. She no longer feared the man she had once begged her father to send away. She knew now that his presence was not only her safety, but also her peace. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.